Hello, hello! Welcome back to Brenda's Books. This is Season 3, Episode 4. Today I will be narrating for you Chapter 4 and Chapter 5 of Queen Andraya. Here we go. Chapter 4. Bad News, Bad Letters, Bad Roses. Andraya stood in her bedchamber and gazed out her window, which lengthened from ceiling to floor. She removed her peacock hairpiece and lay it on her oversized, overstuffed, canopied bed, bursting with Andraya's favorite colors of red and gold. Someone clicked open her door quietly. The familiar tiptoeing revealed Andraya's lady-in-waiting. "Hello, Caleen," Andraya said with a bright smile. Caleen's innocent brown eyes brightened. "How was the assembly?" she asked as she came over to Andraya and helped her remove her accessories. "Very enlightening. Prince Steffan doesn't appear hateful after all." Caleen's face split into a grin. "Intriguing. I thought handsome and wicked were the only combination in a man." Andraya laughed at that. "That does seem to be the norm." "Speaking of men," Caleen dropped 3 envelopes on the bed, all addressed to Her Majesty Queen Andraya of Chaldrea. "Who are these from?" Andraya grabbed an envelope and split it open with her finger. This is Prince Austin of Bistira. Apparently, he has taken it upon himself to inform me of his scholarly education, and that we would make a fine match." Andraya tossed the letter on the bed and opened another. "Oh my. What is it?" Caleen asked, standing on her toes in attempt to read the letter too. "This is Austin's brother. He says Austin does not adore me the way he does." Andraya let out a feigned dramatic gasp. She put the letter over her heart and gave Caleen a look of mock astonishment. "He loves me." The 2 girls laughed as Andraya tossed the second letter onto the bed and opened the third. This time Andraya snorted in disgust and threw the letter aside and let it flit to the floor. "What was that one about?" asked Caleen. "The Prince of Montessu. He skipped the pretended admirations and went right on to telling me he could rule a kingdom better than I ever could, and would be happy to take my place as head crown of Chaldrea." Caleen chuckled, but rubbed Andraya's arm in comfort. "I received a letter too," Caleen said quietly. "Oh?" Andraya asked as she bent to retrieve the letter on the floor. Caleen hesitated, and Andraya's grin turned mischievous. "It's from Oliver, is it not?" Caleen flushed but shook her head. "Oh, come now, Caleen, do let me read it. I will only make fun a little." Caleen sighed. "It's from my mother." Andraya clasped her hands together. "Oh, that's wonderful! How is my old governess doing?" Caleen smiled sadly, then bowed her head. "She's not doing well." Andraya stepped close and placed her hand on Caleen's shoulder. "Is she ill?" "Her doctor gives her only a few months to live," Caleen said, choking on the last word. Andraya let out a soft gasp. "Oh, Caleen." Andraya pulled her friend in for a tight hug. Caleen shook ever so slightly in her embrace. Andraya squeezed tighter. "Dear Mrs. Forthright," she whispered. "I want to see her again before she's gone." "Of course you do." Andraya stared out the large windows, overlooking the gardens as she tried to think. "I will arrange for you to sail to Medine, and I will pay for everything." "Oh, thank you," Caleen said, squeezing Andraya tighter. If only there were a doctor in Medine who specialized in lung problems. Andraya pulled out of the hug to look at Caleen. If she had a specialty doctor, would she live longer? Caleen shrugged and wiped her eyes. Her doctor thinks so. Andraya grabbed Caleen's shoulders in earnest. "Let's bring her to Chaldrea then. Dr. Mason specializes in lungs, and the right medicinal plants grow here. If it weren't for him, Oliver would have died from pneumonia. Remember?" Caleen nodded with a blank stare. She bowed her head to reach into one of her skirt pockets. She pulled out a crumpled letter. "Is that what this word is?" She pointed to a word in the letter that indeed said pneumonia. "Yes, it is. If that is what she has, then her best chance is here with Dr. Mason." Andraya's excitement bubbled over. "I'll ask Alvin to send a message out on the next boat. There's one sailing to Medine before dawn tomorrow. It's only a 2-day trip. That means your mother can be here in 4 days' time." The 2 young women jumped up and down and squealed with delight. I will put an emergency seal on the letter as soon as I can get to my royal office." "Oh, Andraya." Caleen threw her arms around the young queen's neck. "You really are the best friend ever." Andraya laughed, relieved to have come up with a fast solution. Caleen pulled away to look at her friend. "What would the nobles think if they ever found out you weren't always so prim and proper and did nice things for servants?" Andraya shrugged. "They would probably vote me out as an unfit head crown." Then she frowned. "I may be headed that direction already." Caleen grabbed Andraya's shoulders and looked up into her eyes, reminding Andraya of their incredible height difference. "You can dismiss a couple rowdy nobles, can you not? It is not as easy as it seems. I cannot just tarnish all relations with the royal council simply because they dislike me." Her frown deepened. Caleen grabbed Andraya's arms and looked up into her face. "You will make it work. You always do." Just then a knock sounded at the door. Caleen took a step back, and Andraya fixed her posture. "Come in." The door swung open to reveal one of the many footmans. "A delivery for you, Your Majesty." The footman held up a crystal vase overflowing with pink roses. "From whom, Benjamin?" Andraya asked. "His Highness Prince Steffan." Benjamin walked briskly with one formal hand behind his back as he stepped forward and handed the roses to the queen. Andraya lifted the card resting on a thorn. "Please forgive me, Your Majesty. Prince Steffan of Deldria." Andraya bit her lip. "Thank you, Benjamin." Benjamin bowed and exited the room. Andraya placed the vase of roses on her tea table with a little force. "What's the matter?" Caleen asked. Andraya spun a sharp head in her direction. "You know how I despise roses." Caleen sucked in a breath. "Yes, well, at least these are pink. That is the color which represents seeking forgiveness." "I'm aware," said Andraya, gazing out the window. "That is the only reason I have not destroyed them yet." Caleen fell silent. Andraya stared out over the palace grounds and spotted the vast area dedicated to roses, which Gordon had put in just for her. She heaved an angry breath. "After I have everything settled with the coalition, my first item of business will be to remove those rose bushes." Caleen swallowed hard and nodded. Then Andraya whirled around and walked briskly out the door and into the hallway where she plowed right into the solid frame of the butler. "Alvin!" Andraya cried. "Excuse me, Your Majesty," Alvin said in haste, taking a step back. "I have urgent news for you, my queen. I must speak to you in private, at once." Chapter 5. Secret Sabotage. Queen Andraya, still too angry to sit, stood in front of her large ebony desk in her royal office and stared at Alvin, who earnestly tried to keep his composure, but sweat still managed to trickle off his brow, and his large hands fidgeted with his tie. "My dear queen, you know it is a butler's business to only share what he is told to share, but you also know that I have sworn fealty to ultimately serve the head crown." Andraya crossed her arms. "I don't care for preamble. Tell me the news." Alvin hesitated. He wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Alvin, what is it?" Andraya asked with some exasperation. Alvin squared his shoulders, bringing his height just above hers. "There has been a private meeting held among certain noblemen to devise..." He paused to inhale deeply. "To rule Her Majesty out of the head crown position by vote of the royal council." Andraya's heart stilled. Her frame froze. His words sounded surreal and fictitious, but she knew they were true. Finally she found her voice. "Upon what grounds?" Her words were soft but steady. "That is unclear, Your Majesty, but I did hear something about you being an abolitionist and..." He hesitated. "A woman?" Andraya guessed. Her eyebrows lifted. Alvin swallowed and nodded. Andraya meandered over the circular carpet toward the grandfather clock in the corner. "Gordon didn't trade with Gulen until a few months ago. Why is this such a problem to them now?" She turned to Alvin as if he had the answer. Then the jump in his jaw gave her one. "He was trading with them all along, wasn't he?" Alvin responded with a silent stare. Andraya clasped her hands behind her back and began to pace. "That can't be. I found the contract today. It was a renewal contract," she realized, as she stopped in place and glanced back at the butler. How long have you been in service to the head crown, Alvin?
20 years, my queen.
You send messages out to the ships for transport. Has Andraya been transporting to Caleen all this time?
Alvin answered with a reluctant nod. Andraya huffed out an irritated breath and resumed her slow pacing. It wouldn't be the first thing that wretched man kept from me. Alvin's eyes swelled, but he said nothing.
And they are probably planning on putting this to vote at the second coalition meeting tomorrow for added humiliation, are they not?
Another jump in his jaw gave her the answer.
Well, the law says a head crown cannot be voted out without a unanimous vote of the Royal Council. I am sure they do not have that yet.
Andraya bit her lip in dubious thought. She turned to face the butler. Thank you for telling me this, Alvin. You are very loyal. I admire you for that. Alvin tried to remain stoic, but the corner of his mouth curved up. You are too kind, Your Majesty. Andraya smirked. I am not. Now, given this dreadful news you just gave me, I must get to work. My preparations for tomorrow's meeting have now tripled. Alvin frowned. I apologize for that, my queen. Not at all, Andraya said. You may just have saved me from an awful demise. I am glad to hear it. Now that I've done my duty, I must bid you adieu and best of luck. He bowed low. Andraya cocked her head. Alvin, why do I get the impression you intend to leave your position? Alvin flushed. As much as I love being a butler, Your Majesty, I know those noblemen will dismiss me once they find out I told you this. Andraya knew they might attempt worse, and she suspected Alvin also knew, which made his revelation to her all the more courageous. I will not let that happen, Alvin. The butler shook his head. I know the head crown is to sign off on all dismissals, but given the men we are talking about, I am certain they will do it behind your back. Forgive me for such a speech, but I always speak the truth.
Which is why I need you to stay. I will not reveal to anyone what you have told me, Alvin. I promise. You have my word.
Do you not intend to confront them? Oh, yes. Andraya was definite about that. But not about you or this conversation. I will do it my own way. Alvin stared at the queen like he was trying to see her resolve. I will trust my queen on this. Thank you, Your Majesty. Andraya gave him a small smile. Please give my regards to Mrs. Floyd. The butler bowed. I will, thank you. As soon as Alvin closed the door behind him, Andraya sat heavily in a red velvet chair and leaned her head back to look at the ceiling, which revealed a Chaldean flag intricately painted onto its marble surface. I have been queen a grand total of 3 days, and there is already action being taken to vote me out, Andraya thought. And for what? So they can trade with the devil? She already knew what the argument would be. Money. It was always about money. She could already see Chancellor Dolian's handsome and fearsome face in his debate. She spouted off his voice in her head with a mocking tone. If we don't trade with Caleen, where will that money come from? Do you have any idea how much fruit that kingdom buys from us? And then Marquis Draven would say with arrogant zeal, and what of their sugar? How can we possibly remain the finest of the island kingdoms when sugar is nowhere to be found among us? Andraya knew how she could make this new, rather large predicament of hers go away very quickly. All she had to do was agree to trade with Caleen. Could she do that? After all, it's not like her kingdom possessed slaves. She glanced at the flag once more, studying its colors. The charging soldier wore a strapping red uniform, symbolizing valor. The bright yellow sun behind him represented courage for new days and new possibilities. The shining blue sword he grasped in front of him symbolized fighting for truth. How could she claim to be head crown of a kingdom who claimed such standards if she did not stand up for what she believed in? What kind of leader was that? Abruptly, Andraya stood and swished her skirts behind her. She swung open the heavy door of her royal office, clicked her heels down the marble hallway, and passed the enormous living space with extravagant furniture and lamps and tea tables properly placed only for show and not use. Your Majesty. Andraya jumped and stopped short to face the deep voice. Prince Steffan sat on a chair by the fire, reading a book. He stood immediately. All is well? He asked, uncertain of his words. Andraya forced a smile. No, Your Highness. What can I... He pointed to his chest as he searched for his next word. Never send me roses again, Andraya blurted out. The prince looked surprised and a little hurt, but mostly confused. Andraya sighed. I appreciate it, but I very much despise the flower. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a lot of work to do. Then she turned on her heels and left the prince behind. And that concludes Chapter 5. Thank you so much for listening to Queen Andraya. I hope you come back next week for Chapter 6, which is called Lost in Loopholes. I love the next couple of chapters because Andraya's feistiness really comes out. Anyway, I hope you all have a fantastic week. If you want to find out more about Brenda's books, you can visit brendasbooks.net. Until next time, take care.